Let me take you back to a moment that felt like a scene straight out of a courtroom thriller, standing there on the cold, dew-slicked concrete steps of the Oak Haven County Courthouse at 10 in the morning, watching a woman's entire world crumble in high definition. There were four bidders, a single tax auction, and Linda Sterling, a woman whose scream could curdle milk, shrieking, "This is illegal," as the gavel slammed down like a thunderclap, sealing the deal where I bought her beloved clubhouse for exactly $325,000. 3 years before that satisfying impact of wood on wood, this same woman tried to extort me for $15,000 over a boat dock that my grandfather built with his bare hands back when Eisenhower was still sitting in the Oval Office. She claimed my family's cabin, a sanctuary built by a Korean War veteran, didn't fit her vision of a luxury neighborhood. But Linda Sterling, the self-appointed queen of the Pineview Estates HOA, with her surgically frozen smile and the moral backbone of a jellyfish, had absolutely no clue that picking a fight with a retired union electrician was about to be the most expensive mistake of her life. While she was busy filing frivolous lawsuits and burning through retainer fees with downtown lawyers, I was quietly uncovering a secret so massive it would turn her kingdom into dust, revealing that she never actually owned the land she was trying to kick me off of. But to really understand the sweetness of that victory, you have to understand the bitterness of the struggle. So let me paint the picture of how this nightmare began. My grandfather, Grandpa Earl, built our 2-acre lakefront cabin in 1953, seeking peace after surviving the hell of the Chosin Reservoir, placing every single cedar shake and river stone himself as a way to quiet the noise in his head. The smell of that place, a mix of old tobacco, wood smoke, and decades of morning coffee, is the smell of my childhood, the place where I learned the difference between a square knot and a slip knot. And after a brutal divorce that stripped me of 25 years of assets and half my soul, I retreated to Grandpa Earl's cabin to lick my wounds. I was 52, tired, and just wanted to listen to the water lap against the shore, unaware that I was sitting on a property with full riparian water rights that predated every McMansion in the development by 40 years. Enter Linda Sterling, rolling up my gravel driveway in a pristine white Range Rover that looked like it had never seen a speck of dirt, looking like she stepped out of a catalog for people who hate joy. She was 48, married to a silent hedge fund manager, and had moved into Pineview Estates 3 years prior with a singular mission to terraform our rustic community into her personal fiefdom. The sound of those expensive tires crunching on my gravel still triggers a fight-or-flight response in me. "Good morning," she chirped, flashing a practiced real estate agent smile that didn't reach her dead eyes, introducing herself as the HOA president and her companion, Bob Miller, a spineless board member who held a clipboard like a holy relic. I stayed in my rocking chair, offering coffee, but the air shifted instantly when she declined and dropped the hammer. "We're here on official business, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Your dock violates our new aesthetic compliance standards, and quite frankly, the cabin itself is an eyesore that drags down our property values." I looked at the dock, a sturdy, weathered testament to American craftsmanship that had survived nearly 50 winters, and told her that dock had been there since before she was born. She didn't miss a beat, handing me a violation notice with a 30-day deadline and a threat of a $15,000 compliance fee, explaining in that condescending tone usually reserved for toddlers that if I just read the guidelines, I'd see it was all very reasonable. That was the moment I knew I wasn't dealing with a neighbor. I was dealing with a tyrant who had never heard the word no. I called my old union buddy, Tony, a guy who eats legal contracts for breakfast, and he came over, took one look at my deed, and started laughing. "You're not gonna believe this, Jack," he said, slapping the table. "Your property is grandfathered in. You predate their incorporation by decades. They can't touch you." Armed with this knowledge nugget, always check your deed's recording date against the HOA's incorporation date. I wrote Linda a polite, firm letter telling her to essentially pound sand, respectful but absolute. I thought that was the end of it, but I had no idea that letter was just the opening shot of a war. 2 days later, a county code enforcement officer named Inspector Davis showed up for a random inspection, a decent enough guy who admired the cabin's construction, but after finding everything perfect, he leaned in and whispered, "Look, I shouldn't tell you this, but this complaint came from the top. through unusual channels. A quick Freedom of Information Act request, which is your best friend in these situations, revealed 17 emails between Linda Sterling and her cousin who worked as a clerk in the code office, proving she was weaponizing the government to harass me. But I wasn't the only one. I started digging and found Martha Higgins, a 78-year-old retired history teacher with a sharp wit, who told me Linda had fined her for nuisance vegetation, which turned out to be her prize-winning daisies. Martha invited me in, showed me her war room of documentation, because 40 years of teaching middle schoolers teaches you to keep receipts, and we realized Linda was systematically targeting the older, original residents, bullying them into selling so she could flip their lots. We formed a resistance group, meeting over coffee and Martha's apple pie, eventually joined by Commander Bill Vance, a retired Navy officer who knew maritime law better than anyone and confirmed my water rights were federally protected. We were building a defense, gathering the troops, feeling the warmth of solidarity against the cold front of Linda's ambition, but she wasn't done. Realizing I was organizing the neighborhood, she panicked and escalated, serving me with a lawsuit right in the middle of my birthday barbecue. A process server marched past my friends and neighbors, past the cooler of beer and the smoking grill, to hand me papers claiming my dock was a navigational hazard. It was humiliating, it was aggressive, and it was a declaration of total war. But as I looked around at the angry faces of my neighbors, including Elena Rodriguez, a quiet forensic accountant who had just moved in, I realized Linda had just made a fatal tactical error. She made it personal for everyone. Elena, eyes flashing with a hidden intensity, offered to look at the HOA books, suspecting that anyone this aggressive about fines was probably hiding something financial. Meanwhile, Tony dug up dirt on Linda's real estate license, finding prior ethics violations, and discovered that the original developer of Pineview Estates had gone bankrupt years ago, leaving behind massive unpaid environmental fees. We were gathering ammunition, preparing to fire back with a countersuit for harassment, but Linda, drunk on power and cheap Chardonnay, showed up at our July 4th block party, stumbling and slurring, screaming for everyone to hear, "I don't care what some hillbilly thinks he owns. This is my lake now." My digital recorder, discreetly clipped to my belt, caught every venomous word, capturing the silence of the stunned crowd and the moment Bob Miller finally grew a spine and dragged her away. The lawsuit was weak, her reputation was cracking, and we were just getting started, but Linda decided to go nuclear, calling the EPA with an anonymous tip that my septic system was leaking sewage into the pristine waters of Lake Serenity. The arrival of the EPA was meant to be Linda's kill shot, the move that would bury me under federal fines and force me off Grandpa Earl's land. But she forgot the first rule of dealing with a union electrician. We anticipate failure points before they happen. I had already commissioned independent water testing weeks prior, just a gut feeling that a woman this unhinged would try to attack my environmental stewardship. So when Sarah Chong, a no-nonsense EPA inspector, arrived, I wasn't sweating. I was brewing coffee. Sarah spent hours testing the water, her frown deepening not when she looked at my samples, which were crystal clear, but when she looked toward the manicured, chemical-laden lawns of the Pineview Estates McMansions. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, holding up a vial that caught the sunlight, "your water is cleaner than the bottled stuff, but the phosphate levels near the new development storm drains are off the charts. Someone is poisoning this lake, and it isn't you." It was a classic boomerang. Linda's attempt to frame me had just exposed the HOA's massive, illegal runoff problem, caused by overfertilization and a faulty stormwater system that Commander Bill Vance had been tracking from his boat for months. While the EPA was quietly opening a file on the HOA, Elena Rodriguez was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of financial ledgers, her face pale as she stared at the numbers. "Jack," she whispered, the rustle of papers sounding like a thunderclap in the quiet cabin. "You need to see this. Linda has been funneling nearly $90,000 in landscaping fees to a shell company owned by her husband over the last 2 years, but that's not even the big news." She pushed a dusty, yellowing document toward me, the original incorporation papers of the development, and pointed to a clause that made my heart stop. The developer, in his rush to declare bankruptcy, had never legally transferred the common areas, the clubhouse, the tennis courts, the beach access, the very ground Linda stood on to lord over us. to the HOA. Legally, Pineview Estates HOA didn't own the amenities they were charging us to use. The title was still in limbo, stuck in the ghostly hands of a defunct corporation. So who owns it? I asked, my mind racing. Technically, Elena smirked. Nobody, but the county has a lien on it for 3 years of unpaid property taxes. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The county was owed $127,000 in back taxes for the common areas, and if those taxes weren't paid, the county would auction the land to the highest bidder. I did the math instantly. My divorce settlement plus the inheritance left me with just enough liquid cash to cover the taxes, and then some. I could legally buy Linda Sterling's kingdom out from under her feet, owning the clubhouse she ruled like a palace, the tennis courts she played on, and the gate she used to keep undesirables out. We dubbed it Operation Lake Justice. Martha Higgins mobilized the neighborhood gossip network to keep Linda distracted with minor complaints. Commander Bill handled the maritime law aspects to ensure the title transfer would include the waterfront access. Elena calculated the maximum bid we could afford, which was around $350,000, and Sarah Chong, now working pro bono on the environmental side, prepared a massive dossier on the pollution to drop on the HOA the moment the auction was over. Linda, completely oblivious and blinded by her own rage, began to spiral as her harassment lawsuit against me stalled in court. Sensing she was losing control, she made a desperate, criminal mistake at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Commander Bill had convinced me to install night vision cameras, and sure enough, the footage captured a figure in black, moving with the stealth of a drunken raccoon, sneaking onto my property with bolt cutters. We watched in silence as Linda Sterling cut the ropes of my floating dock, sending my grandfather's legacy drifting out into the dark water, an act of petty malice that crossed the line from civil dispute to criminal vandalism. I didn't confront her. I filed a police report, and within hours, the video was viral on the local community page, sparking outrage even among her loyalists. Desperate and realizing the walls were closing in, she cornered me at the local marina, looking haggard, her perfect facade cracking. "Look, Jack," she hissed, glancing around nervously. "I can offer you $50,000 cash right now to just drop the countersuit and leave. We both know you don't belong here with people like us." My hand instinctively went to the pocket where my recorder was running. "Are you trying to bribe me, Linda?" I asked, voice calm, heart hammering. "I'm trying to offer you a way out," she spat back. I walked away with a federal crime on tape, bribery and intimidation in a property dispute, and took it straight to Sarah Chong, whose eyes lit up with the fire of a prosecutor who just found the smoking gun. We had her on harassment, vandalism, fraud, and now bribery, but we didn't strike yet. We needed the auction. 10 days before the tax sale, the EPA dropped the hammer on the HOA regarding the pollution, revealing a potential $2.3 million fine that would bankrupt the association. Linda called an emergency meeting, hands shaking as she tried to lie to the angry mob of homeowners, but nobody was buying it anymore. Bob Miller publicly apologized to me, resigning on the spot. But amidst the chaos, I stayed silent about the auction, the secret weapon that would end this war permanently. However, secrets in a small town are hard to keep. Word leaked. On the morning of the auction, I sat in my truck, watching 3 other bidders register: a developer, a conservation group, and a mysterious LLC that smelled distinctly of Linda's desperate husband. The stage was set for a showdown that wasn't just about property lines anymore. It was about the soul of Lake Serenity. The air on the courthouse steps was thick with tension, the kind you can taste, as the morning sun burned off the fog, revealing the players in this high-stakes game. I stood there in my flannel shirt and work boots, holding a manila envelope containing a certified check that represented my entire future, while Linda's BMW screeched into the lot like a bat out of hell. She sprinted toward us, tennis skirt flapping, screaming that the proceedings were illegal, her voice cracking with the hysteria of a woman watching her power evaporate. But the county clerk just peered over her glasses and cited the statute. Unpaid taxes mean the county sells the land. End of story. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like a rapid-fire snare drum, opened the bidding at $127,000. The mysterious LLC, clearly a front for Linda trying to save her skin with her husband's money, jumped in immediately. The developer countered. The price climbed, $200,000. $250,000. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Rachel Cole, a reporter from the local news channel who had been following the corruption story, had her camera trained on Linda, capturing every twitch of her manicured face as the price soared past her reach. At $280,000, the developer folded, leaving only me and Linda's proxy. I took a breath, thought of Grandpa Earl placing those cedar shingles one by one, thought of the piece I came here to find, and I shouted, $325,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda frantically grabbed her husband's arm, whispering violently, but he shook his head. They were tapped out. Going once, going twice. The gavel hung in the air for an eternity before crashing down. Sold to bidder number one. The sound was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. Linda let out a wail that sounded less like a human and more like a wounded animal, collapsing onto the steps while the cameras rolled. But the reality was swift and brutal. I now owned the clubhouse, the pool, the park, and the roads. Linda Sterling was essentially standing in my living room. The aftermath was a blur of vindication. A sheriff's deputy, looking almost bored, handed Linda an eviction notice from the clubhouse premises right there on the sidewalk because, ironically, she was behind on her dues that were now owed to me. I looked into the news camera, calm as a mill pond, and delivered the line I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks. I just bought my neighbor's clubhouse. I guess that makes them my tenants now. The fallout was catastrophic for her and glorious for the community. Linda was stripped of her real estate license after the ethics board saw the evidence of her fraud. She faced criminal charges for the bribery and the environmental cover-up, forcing her to sell her mansion to pay legal fees and move to a cramped apartment on the other side of town. The Queen of Pineview was dethroned, leaving behind a legacy of caution tape and court documents. But the real victory wasn't her destruction, it was our reconstruction. As the new owner, I opened the amenities to everyone, slashing the fees and turning the clubhouse into a genuine community center. Martha Higgins, winning the legitimate election in a landslide, brought transparency back to the board. We used the settlement money from my countersuit to start the Earl Reynolds Memorial Scholarship for trade school students. And with the EPA's help, we secured grants to fix the wetlands, watching the lake heal until the osprey returned to nest in the tall pines. And me? I found something better than solitude. Elena Rodriguez and I started sharing more than just legal strategies. She moved into the cabin last spring, and her salsa now sits on the table next to my coffee. We sit on the dock, securely tied and fully legal, watching the sun dip below the horizon, listening to the laughter of kids playing in the park that used to be a battleground. It makes you wonder, though, doesn't it? In a world where people like Linda can weaponize the system against honest folks, where does the line between justice and revenge actually lie? Was it right for me to take everything, or was it the only way to stop a bully who would never stop herself? I think Grandpa Earl would say you fight fire with water, but sometimes you just have to buy the whole damn fire station. What would you have done? Would you have walked away with the bribe, or would you have burned the kingdom down to save the village? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe, because next week, we're investigating an HOA that tried to ban vegetable gardens until they realized the homeowner was an agricultural lawyer with a penchant for scorched earth litigation. You won't want to miss it.